I'm here with Pam Holland. Pam is an extraordinary worship leader. She's also a dear friend, and she's the first person that I had the privilege of hiring on staff as a worship leader. Pam brings not only a heart, but extraordinary gifts to leading worship. And we're just going to take a few minutes and have her speak a little bit about worship. Pam, thanks for being with us.
Sure.
So first of all, can you give us a little bit of your background, how you grew up, and maybe experience of worship growing up?
Wow. My worship experiences are pretty varied because I was an Army brat. And so although most of the churches we worshiped in were traditional black experience, because my dad traveled so much because we moved around with them, we worshiped in whatever chaplain that we have, whoever the chaplain was. So it could be Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian. So I grew up being accustomed to different kinds of worship styles, different kinds of music, different kinds of preaching and teaching styles. I just grew up used to all of that. And then when my dad finally retired, we settled down in Kansas City, and then of course we joined the church that my family had been going to, which was predominantly African American. Well, it was all African American. Mm-hmm. And then my mom and dad kind of had a spiritual awakening. They didn't want to do church as it had always been done. And so my dad spoke out a little bit against it at our church, and we got kind of ostracized. And I stayed at our church a little bit longer than my parents did because I was really into the gospel music there, and I was president of the choir, and I was really involved with it. So I didn't make the changes they did, but we migrated to a church that had its roots instead of National Baptist Convention, which is traditionally the African American Baptist Convention. We went to American Baptist Convention, which my parents thought was more diverse, and that was a little easier for me because we grew up that way. There were times when we would be the only black kids in town based on where my dad was stationed. So we made that leap. And from doing that, I got exposed to this new Christian contemporary music that was out there. And our church, our pastor, although he was black, he kind of let us do our thing with the music. So we integrated African American music with this Christian contemporary stuff that was out there, and it was a really good fit. And I used that along with my background of I was classically trained vocalist at the University of Kansas, and so put all that together and started directing the music at my church. Had to brush up on playing the piano. It was a smaller church, and so from that I was able to really just have some freedom in how to set the tone for music and worship. So I used a variety of music. I used hymns, spirituals, gospels, and then that Christian contemporary stuff that we had really started having a heart for at our church, and it worked out really, really well.
That's good. And Pam, by the way, has an amazing voice, one of the most gifted singers I've ever heard. You probably could have had a national or international career in that, but you've chosen to follow God in leading people in worship, and hundreds and thousands of people have been blessed because of your ministry. So I'm asking other people this question. I want to ask you, so what is worship in its essence for you?
Wow. For me, worship is that intimate connection with God. And one time when I was describing it to someone, it's like if you go to the drive-through at the bank, if you're not using the ATM, and you have to put that whatever your transactions are, and you put it in that little tube thing, and it goes up in the tube, and then something comes back down. To me, that's what worship is about. It goes up, it comes back down. I give my offering to Him, and then I receive His Spirit, His blessing, and it's continuous. It's just a continual flow, me to Him and Him to me.
That's great. That's great. So let me ask this. In terms of now you're here at Edinbrook, and we're so diverse not only in different economic cultures, but also racially we're diverse and culturally we're very diverse. So how do you approach leading worship in this setting? That's a really tough question.
It's tough. It's tricky. I guess for me, as an African American, with the diverse background, I try to reach back to all of the worship experiences I've had, because I've worshiped in all white congregations and all black congregations, and then a mixture. So really what I try to be in tune to, of course we all have those songs that hit our sweet spot, but I really try to be in tune to where I think God wants his people to go in worship. So I try to find music that I don't want to say just appeals to people, because this is our offering to God, but I don't want to leave people behind. So I look at it as that corporate worship is different from my own personal worship. So I have to, in order to please God, I please him through pleasing his people and drawing them into worship. That being said, I also think that as believers, we've gotten so comfortable in our worship styles. I think that a worship leader must stretch people, because it's stretching is how we grow. And so I don't think that people should come into worship and leave unchanged. They have to be stretched. I had to stretch. And as an African American too, sometimes I get impatient, because for people, assimilation is, if you're at a black church, then if you enter into a black church and you're a different race, then people expect you to worship that way. And conversely, too, you've had the experience where if you're at a white church, then you're expected to assimilate. And I think worship has to go beyond the boundaries of this assimilation, and it has to be more toward reconciliation, and not just mixing up the styles, but just embracing those styles and having a nice, big, messy mixture of music that pleases God. And then I think through that too, people find they're surprised. They're surprised at how deep their worship can go when they expand themselves, when they stretch themselves to different kinds of worship.
That's good. How would you counsel a church that is maybe going through change? How would you counsel them to move from where they are to where God's calling them to be? They may be a church that is experiencing new demographics in the area. So any thoughts on that?
I think it has to be intentional. I think too many churches that are wanting to experience that kind of growth think it's just going to happen. If we build it, they will come. It has to be intentional. I think that church staffs, if your move is toward cultural diversity, then the staffs need to reflect that. If the move is toward multi-generational diversity, then the staff has to reflect that. And that's painful for people, because that means sometimes you have to give up a little something. But I think that's what has to happen. It has to be intentional, and it has to be bathed in prayer. There's not enough of bathing that worship and that planning in prayer. We go out in our own way, in our humanness, and we fail to include God in that planning.
That's so good. Let me ask, in terms of, we have different teams here, and the team that you lead, how do you, we can't really impart it, but how do you help nurture that culture of worship within your team?
I think you have to start out, if you're the worship leader, you have to model the culture that you're trying to establish. So to be loving, and then to gently nudge people. I always explain, I always give my own background, my own experiences, the way that I was able to stretch, how God has been able to use me. I use that as an example to tell people, I did this and you can do it too, and it doesn't hurt. We've given up something, my family and I, by intentionally choosing to be a part of congregation where we think we can play a role, that God can use us to play a role in this, in integrating or introducing different styles of worship. And we have to get beyond the racial stereotyping of the worship, because the way I lead worship isn't so much African American. It's more, this is how God wired me, because the experiences that I have had are so varied. I lead worship probably more passionately, but that has a lot to do with how God has wired me to be. So I tell those stories. I do a lot of storytelling and a lot of modeling, and then a lot of introducing songs one at a time, and then if it's a style that is a little uncomfortable for them, sometimes I'll take a while to teach it, or I'll back off and I'll try it again. Same thing with the congregation. You want to help people stretch and grow, but if I introduce a song and I'm looking and people aren't receiving it, no matter how passionately I feel about it, if it's not being received, it's not the right time. So I can lay that song to the side and then pray for God to give me counsel is when it's the right time to do that.
Right. One of the things that just really dawned on me, too, is what we love so much about you, and I'm speaking my wife and myself, is that you are not only a gifted worship leader, but you really have the heart of a pastor. And I see that in how you lead, and I've used this, paraphrasing what Paul wrote, follow me as I follow Christ. I see that dynamic happening on your team, where people see you, they're not worshiping you, but they see God alive in who you are and how you live your life, and that seems to just permeate the entire team. And I think that's a really big lesson that we can learn. I've learned just from observing you and being able to serve with you. So one other question that just dawned on me, I just met with one of our leadership, and one of the things that when we are in worship leadership, we kind of become a lightning rod. And one of the things that I said, especially in a church that has so many different cultures in it, that we can almost be in the middle of the tug of war, and sometimes we're even the rope. But how do you guard your heart in all of that?
Well, when I'm feeling really bad, I talk to you.
And me too, I talk to you.
The other thing I've learned to do is in my, I hate to say my secular job because it's all for God's glory. But in my other job, I lead and I manage. And one of the things I've learned as a leader is that you have to reflect a little bit on all of that feedback that you're getting, but you also have to be strong in the vision that God has given, and so that I can take it in and I can look at it. And stuff hurts my feelings. I'm human too, but I try to be humble enough to look at it and say, is there any truth to this at all? Is there something that I can learn from? Is there a mistake I've made? If I know I haven't, if I prayed about it, I discard that. I try not to let that stuff stay with me. And if I find that it's hanging on a while, then I have people I trust, you, my husband, I have some dear friends that I can trust, where I can vent, and I can trust them because they know it's just venting. And then I have to just let it go. I have to let it go because you get hit from every side. Sometimes you feel so strongly that this is right, and you're just really into worship, and you've really worshiped, and then the bombs start coming in, and then you find out that somebody unintentionally, just got left behind. I'm learning to when someone actually confronts me, is to pray for that person right then and there and say, brother or sister, I love the Lord just as much as you do. We all do. And all things work for the good of those who love the Lord and live according to his purposes. So I try to make them see what we have more in common than the things that separate us, and know that even though this may not be your cup of tea, I'm trying just as hard as you are to be part of God's kingdom building. And so that we can stop judging each other or making assumptions about each other. And if I really messed up, I didn't intend to, The piece of it for me too is trying to stay humble, is keeping that humility. And it's hard because there's the artist in me, you know you have a gift. God gave you that gift. You know it's a good gift. And so, you know, you have the little ego thing you have to really be prayerful and fight hard against. But then there's that humility that has to stay there. I'm always telling you, I'm a hot mess saved by grace.
Yes.
And I say that because I have to humble myself, because it's only in that maybe God is speaking to me through one of these people. And so I have to remember, hot mess saved by grace, so that God can continue to use me.
That's so good. And Pam, what I also appreciate about you is in our interaction that we know that we have a mutual respect and love in Christ. And in that, I always love coming to you for feedback, because you will be honest with me and in a way that I don't feel like I was trashed or abused. And I think that's another part of the team dynamic that I really appreciate that you bring here. So, well, we're out of time, but I want to thank you. And if you ever have a chance to experience this amazing woman lead worship, I encourage you to do that. Pam, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
God bless.
Okay.